The night Laura Bennett disappeared began like any other quiet night in her neighborhood. The street where she lived was known for being calm, the kind of place where porch lights stayed on out of habit and nothing ever seemed to happen. It was late October, and the air carried a sharp chill that slipped through the cracks of closed windows. Inside her small two-story house, Laura had already gone through her usual routine. She washed her dishes, checked the locks on the doors, and set her phone on the bedside table before turning off the lights. By all appearances, it was a normal night, the kind that never makes the news. But shortly after 2 in the morning, something changed. Laura woke suddenly, her heart pounding before she even understood why. At first, she lay still in her bed, staring into the darkness, trying to listen. The house was quiet, but not the comforting quiet she was used to. It felt heavy, tense, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She sat up slowly, careful not to make a sound. That was when she noticed it. The faint glow from the hallway light was on. She always turned it off before sleeping. Always. She held her breath and listened harder. Somewhere below her bedroom, there was a sound. Soft. Slow. It was not loud enough to be clear, but it was real. It reminded her of someone shifting their weight, or brushing against furniture. Her mouth went dry. Laura reached for her phone, her hands already shaking, and slipped out of bed as quietly as she could. The floor felt cold beneath her feet as she moved toward the bedroom door, then stopped. Another sound came from downstairs, closer this time. The fear in her chest tightened. Laura backed away and opened her closet, stepping inside and pulling the door shut behind her. In the darkness, surrounded by hanging clothes, she tried to calm herself. Maybe she was imagining it. Maybe she forgot to turn off the light. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. She had lived alone for 3 years. She knew the sounds of her house. This was different. She unlocked her phone and stared at the screen for a moment, her thumb hovering. Then she dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, Laura struggled to find her voice. It came out as a whisper, thin and trembling. She gave her name and address, speaking as quietly as possible. She told the dispatcher that she believed someone was inside her house. She said she had heard movement downstairs and that a door might be open. The dispatcher asked her questions in a calm, steady voice, trying to keep her focused. Laura answered when she could, pausing often to listen. She explained that she was hiding in her bedroom closet. She said she was afraid to leave the room. The dispatcher told her that police were on their way and asked her to stay on the line. Laura nodded even though the dispatcher couldn't see her. She pressed the phone close to her face, barely daring to breathe. As the seconds passed, her fear grew heavier. Every small sound felt louder inside the closet. The soft hum of the house, the faint creak of wood, even her own breathing felt dangerous. Then she heard it again. Footsteps. Slow and careful. They moved across the floor below her, stopping, then starting again. Someone was walking through her house. Laura's grip on the phone tightened. She whispered to the dispatcher that she could hear someone moving. The dispatcher asked if she could safely leave the house through a window. Laura glanced toward the closet door, her mind racing. The bedroom window was across the room. To reach it, she would have to open the closet, step into the open, and make noise. She whispered that she couldn't. Not yet. The dispatcher told her to stay where she was and keep talking. Police were only minutes away. Then something changed in Laura's voice. She stopped responding to questions. The dispatcher could hear her breathing, fast and uneven, like she was trying to stay quiet but couldn't control it. There was another sound now, faint but steady, a soft tapping noise, repeating slowly. At the time, the dispatcher thought it might be Laura's fingers brushing against something, or the phone moving in her hand. Laura leaned deeper into the corner of the closet, pressing herself against the wall. Her thoughts raced. She tried to remember if she had told anyone her schedule, if she had left a door unlocked by mistake, if this could somehow be explained. But the fear in her body told her the truth. Someone was there, and they were getting closer. The footsteps reached the stairs. Each step creaked under weight, slow and controlled, as if the person climbing them did not want to be heard. Laura squeezed her eyes shut. The tapping sound grew louder now, closer, no longer distant. The dispatcher called Laura's name, asking her to respond, to tell her what was happening. Laura's lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Her throat felt tight, like it had closed in on itself. The footsteps stopped outside her bedroom door. Laura could hear the faint sound of someone standing there. Not moving, just waiting. Her heart felt like it was going to burst out of her chest. The closet felt smaller, the air thinner. She raised the phone again and whispered the words that would later be played over and over again on the news. His hey. For a moment, there was nothing. Then the tapping sound stopped. The line went silent. When police arrived 7 minutes later, they found Laura's house just as she had described it. The front door was unlocked, though there were no signs of damage. The hallway light was on. Her bedroom door stood open, the closet door slightly ajar. Laura's phone lay on the bedroom floor, the screen dark. There was no sign of Laura Bennett. That single 911 call became the center of a mystery that would haunt investigators and terrify the public. A woman had reached out for help, and then vanished into thin air. No screams, no struggle, just a whisper, a warning, and silence. And from that moment on, one question echoed louder than any other. What happened to Laura Bennett after she called 911? By the time the sun rose over the quiet suburban street, Laura Bennett's disappearance had already begun to feel unreal. Police cars lined the road, their flashing lights cutting through the early morning fog. Neighbors stood on their lawns in robes and jackets, whispering to one another, trying to understand how a woman could vanish from her own home in the middle of the night. From the outside, Laura's house looked untouched, peaceful even, but inside, it was quickly becoming a place full of questions and unease. Detectives entered carefully, treating every room as a possible crime scene. They expected signs of panic, maybe overturned furniture or broken glass, something that would explain the terror in Laura's voice during the 911 call. Instead, they found order. The living room was neat. The couch pillows were arranged just as Laura liked them. The kitchen counter was clean, with a single mug left beside the sink, as if she had planned to wash it in the morning. There was no sign of forced entry anywhere in the house. Windows were closed and locked. The back door showed no damage. It was as if whoever entered had been invited, or already knew how to get in. In the bedroom, officers found Laura's phone lying face down near the bed. The battery was nearly dead, suggesting the call had ended naturally, not because the phone was destroyed. The closet where she claimed to be hiding was empty, her clothes still hanging neatly. Shoes were lined up by the door. Her purse sat on a chair, untouched, with her wallet inside. Her car was parked in the driveway. Everything Laura needed to leave was still there. This made no sense. If Laura had run away, she would have taken her phone, her money, something. If there had been a struggle, there would have been signs. But the house offered nothing. No blood. No fingerprints that didn't belong to Laura. No footprints. It was as if she had simply dissolved into the air. Detectives moved outside, searching the yard and surrounding area. The grass showed no signs of disturbance. The fence was intact. There were no drag marks, no broken branches, nothing to suggest someone had been taken by force. K9 units were brought in, but the dogs lost Laura's scent at the edge of the driveway. That detail unsettled investigators more than anything else. It suggested she either left in a vehicle or was taken in one. Neighbors were questioned one by one. Most said they had slept through the night and heard nothing unusual. One elderly man across the street mentioned hearing a door slam sometime after 2 in the morning, but he couldn't say where it came from. Another neighbor recalled seeing a dark-colored sedan parked farther down the street earlier that night. He thought nothing of it at the time. Cars passed through the area often, but by the time police arrived, the vehicle was gone. Laura's family arrived later that morning. Her sister, Emily, could barely stand when she saw the police tape around the house. She kept repeating the same sentence, over and over, saying Laura would never leave without telling someone. Emily described her sister as cautious, organized, and deeply private. Laura didn't take risks. She didn't bring strangers into her home. She followed routines and stuck to them. Hearing the 911 call for the first time left Emily shaken. She said she had never heard Laura sound that afraid in her entire life. Investigators reviewed Laura's background carefully. She worked as a librarian at a local school and had been there for years. Her co-workers described her as quiet but kind, someone who smiled easily and avoided conflict. There were no recent arguments, no complaints, no troubling behavior. Her phone records showed no threatening messages. Her bank accounts were untouched. There was no sign she had been preparing to disappear. As the hours turned into days, the case drew public attention. News stations played the 911 call repeatedly, focusing on the whisper and the final words. People across the country listened closely, trying to hear what Laura had heard. The town became restless. Parents locked their doors earlier. Porch lights stayed on all night. Fear settled in, quiet but heavy. Inside the police department, frustration grew. Every theory seemed to fall apart under scrutiny. A random intruder made little sense without forced entry. A kidnapping without evidence seemed unlikely. Running away did not match Laura's personality or behavior. The more investigators studied the scene, the more it felt like something important was missing, something invisible but crucial. Then a detective noticed something small during another review of the 911 audio. Beneath Laura's whispering, there was a faint sound that didn't belong to the house itself. It was rhythmic, slow, almost deliberate. At first, it had been dismissed as background noise, maybe Laura nervously tapping her phone or brushing against the closet wall. But when the audio was isolated and played again, it sounded different. It sounded intentional. The tapping was too steady to be nervous movement. It wasn't random. It repeated at even intervals, like someone tapping a fingernail against wood or glass. This detail changed the mood in the room. Investigators wondered if Laura had been signaling something, or if someone else was making that sound nearby. The idea that she might not have been alone in the closet sent a chill through everyone listening. Police searched the house again, focusing on areas they might have overlooked. Walls were examined for hidden spaces. The attic and basement were checked thoroughly. Nothing was found. No hidden rooms. No signs of surveillance equipment. Still, the feeling remained that the house was hiding a secret. As the search continued, tips poured in. Some claimed to have seen Laura at grocery stores or gas stations miles away. Others suggested she had been taken by someone she knew. A few insisted the call itself sounded staged. Every lead was followed, and every lead ended the same way. No way. Days turned into weeks. The case grew colder, but the questions grew louder. How could a woman disappear after calling for help, without leaving a trace? Why did her house look untouched, almost staged? And most disturbing of all, why did it feel like Laura knew more than she was able to say? Investigators began to suspect that the house was not the beginning of the story, but the middle. That whatever happened to Laura Bennett did not start the night she called 911. It had started long before, quietly, patiently, waiting for the moment when fear would finally break the silence. Chapter 2 of the investigation did not bring answers. It brought doubt. Doubt about the scene. Doubt about the call. Doubt about whether Laura had ever truly been safe in her own home. And as the town waited for news, one unsettling thought lingered in the minds of those closest to the case. What if Laura hadn't just been hiding from someone that night? What if she had been living with the danger all along? The more time passed without answers, the more detectives began to realize that Laura Bennett's life was more complicated than anyone had suspected. At first, they had approached the case as a straightforward disappearance, a woman terrified of someone entering her home, calling 911, and vanishing before the authorities arrived. But the quiet suburban life she appeared to lead was beginning to unravel under investigation. The seemingly ordinary librarian had secrets, and each new discovery raised more questions than it answered. Detectives started with Laura's work life, speaking to her co-workers at the local school library where she had worked for nearly a decade. They described her as polite and professional, someone who rarely socialized outside of work but was reliable and kind to students. She had no history of conflict with anyone. No one had threatened her, and she had never mentioned feeling unsafe. But when investigators asked about her behavior in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, a different picture began to emerge. Coworkers remembered that she had stopped eating lunch in the staff room, began declining invitations to social events, and had become unusually quiet and distracted. She had requested time off from work in the days before the disappearance, citing vague personal reasons but refusing to explain further. At first, these small details seemed like stress or anxiety, but when detectives looked deeper into her personal life, they found patterns that were impossible to ignore. Laura's phone records revealed repeated, very short calls to a number that didn't appear in any public directory. Each call lasted less than a minute, sometimes only 30 seconds, and they occurred late at night, exactly when she was home alone. When investigators tried to trace the number, it led nowhere. It wasn't associated with any known phone carrier, and there were no accounts connected to it. Whoever she had been contacting was careful not to leave a trail, just like someone who had been watching her. Then police discovered the folder on her computer that would change everything about the case. It was hidden in an obscure part of her file system, password protected, and organized with almost obsessive precision. Inside were photographs taken inside her own home. Some were of the living room, some of the kitchen, and some taken in the bedroom. The most chilling ones showed her sitting at her desk, reading, or sleeping. Every image was time-stamped, and the timestamp spanned several months, showing that someone had been inside her house repeatedly, quietly, and without leaving any trace. Detectives pored over the photos for clues. There were no reflections of the person who had taken them, no shadows in the corners. The camera appeared to have been left in place, almost like a trap. It was clear that the person taking the photos knew the layout of the house intimately, knew Laura's habits, and knew how to move without leaving a trace. The implication was terrifying. The disappearance had not been spontaneous. Whoever had taken Laura had been planning it, watching for the right moment, and knew exactly how to exploit her vulnerability. Investigators began to look more closely at Laura's relationships. She had few friends, but those she had were close. None reported any unusual behavior, threats, or conflicts. Her family, especially her sister Emily, had no idea that Laura might be in danger. There were no known ex-boyfriends, no disputes with neighbors, no enemies at work. The picture of a normal, cautious woman conflicted with the evidence of someone being watched for months. To make sense of the photographs, police turned to digital forensics. Every image was examined for metadata, camera type, and any possible fingerprints. The analysis revealed nothing unusual about the images themselves. They were normal JPEG files. But the fact that someone had taken them without detection was enough to indicate a highly meticulous intruder. Someone who had been inside Laura's life, possibly close enough that she did not suspect them, or someone who had the patience and skill to remain invisible. As the investigation unfolded, detectives also considered the possibility that Laura herself had been involved in something unknown. It was an uncomfortable theory. Laura had always been careful, private, and orderly. But the repeated secret calls, the carefully hidden photographs, and her recent withdrawal from friends and routines suggested that she might have been aware of being watched and trying to gather evidence. Perhaps she had been investigating someone herself, documenting what was happening without alerting anyone. The 911 call itself took on new meaning. When detectives replayed it, slowing it down and isolating background sounds, they noticed subtleties they hadn't heard before. Beneath Laura's voice, a faint sound, almost imperceptible at normal speed, repeated at intervals. At first, it sounded like tapping, like a fingernail brushing against a hard surface. But when slowed down, the rhythm became almost deliberate, intentional. It was as if someone was communicating in the background, quietly, waiting for the right moment to intervene. The idea that Laura's fear had been directed at someone she knew became increasingly likely. Whoever had been inside her house before her disappearance had been cautious, patient, and knowledgeable about her routines. Meanwhile, police examined surveillance footage from the neighborhood. Most cameras pointed toward streets and intersections, capturing cars and pedestrians, but nothing of Laura herself in the early hours of the morning. Some cameras recorded a dark sedan moving slowly past her house in the hour before she disappeared. There were no license plates visible, no identifying features. But the sighting matched one of the neighbor reports from that night. It reinforced the theory that someone was watching, waiting for the exact moment to act. As detectives dug deeper, they found that Laura had recently changed her daily habits. She had stopped using her social media accounts, which she had previously checked every day. She canceled appointments and social outings. These changes, minor as they seemed, were crucial. They indicated she was aware of being observed, cautious not to leave a trail, and perhaps planning her own moves carefully. In the context of the photographs and phone calls, it became clear that Laura's life had been infiltrated by someone with patience and strategy. But for all the evidence gathered, one critical question remained: who? Investigators considered the possibilities carefully. It had to be someone with access to her home, knowledge of her routines, and the skill to avoid detection. That eliminated random strangers and burglars. It suggested someone close, someone who could enter her house without alarming her, someone she might have trusted. The chilling reality was that Laura had likely been living with this danger for months, unaware of its full extent until the night she made the 911 call. Detectives also considered the psychological toll on Laura. Being watched so closely, having private moments photographed, receiving anonymous calls or messages, if she had been aware of any of it, would have been terrifying. Fear like that can make people act cautiously, withdraw from friends, and even hide clues from investigators. In a sense, it explained the contradictions in her behavior. She had been calm on the 911 call, whispering and hiding in the closet, but she had also been methodical in leaving her phone in a place where police could find it. Perhaps she had hoped the call would lead authorities to discover something about her situation, to tip them off to what had been happening in her life for months. As the days continued, investigators began to piece together a narrative that was both frightening and tragic. Laura had likely been aware of someone infiltrating her life. She had attempted to reach out for help in a way that would reveal the truth without putting herself at further risk. The intruder had anticipated her actions, however, and struck when she was most vulnerable. The disappearance was not random. It was the climax of months of manipulation, surveillance, and intimidation. Public interest in the case grew, fueled by the disturbing nature of the hidden photographs and the unanswered questions from the 911 call. Journalists and true crime enthusiasts speculated endlessly about the identity of the person who had been inside Laura's home. Was it a stalker? A former colleague? Someone from her past? The town grew wary. Families locked doors earlier, and the local police department felt the pressure to solve the case quickly. Despite the evidence gathered, the trail seemed to go cold in unexpected ways. The untraceable phone number, the clean photographs, the lack of fingerprints or DNA left behind. These details frustrated investigators. Whoever had entered Laura's life had done so with precision and patience, leaving almost nothing to follow. It was as if the person had planned for every possible scenario, anticipating police methods, and erasing traces meticulously. Weeks turned into months, and the investigation became as much about understanding Laura's life as it was about finding her. Detectives pieced together her routines, her relationships, her habits, and her private communications. Each revelation suggested that she had been more aware of her danger than anyone had imagined, and that her final 911 call had been a desperate attempt to communicate the truth. The call, the photographs, and the late-night phone calls formed a puzzle that pointed to a chilling conclusion. Laura Bennett had been living under the careful watch of someone who knew her better than she knew herself, and that person had orchestrated her disappearance with methodical precision. Yet even with all the details coming to light, the identity of the intruder remained a mystery. Police could only speculate about motives, relationships, or grudges. They could confirm patterns, note surveillance, and track behavior, but the human element, the mind behind the actions, was invisible. The photographs captured life inside Laura's home, but revealed nothing about the person taking them. The phone calls hinted at interaction but offered no leads. Laura's life had been infiltrated in a way that left no fingerprints, no clues, and no trail to follow. As the investigation pressed on, detectives became convinced that solving the case would require thinking differently. The disappearance was no longer a matter of simply following evidence. It required understanding the relationship between victim and intruder, the psychology of someone patient enough to observe, manipulate, and control another person without detection. And that realization brought a new sense of urgency. If Laura was still alive, time was critical. If she was gone, the evidence left behind might be the only way to bring justice. In the quiet of the police department, investigators replayed Laura's 911 call over and over, scrutinizing each detail. The whisper, the faint tapping, the pauses, all of it became a roadmap. It suggested a confrontation, an intruder who was familiar, skilled, and terrifyingly calm. Every analysis pointed to one conclusion: Laura's disappearance was not random, not impulsive, and not the work of a stranger. It had been the result of careful planning, hidden surveillance, and a knowledge of her life that no ordinary person would have. The case of Laura Bennett was no longer just a missing person story. It had evolved into a puzzle of secrecy, surveillance, and subtle manipulation. The more investigators uncovered about her life, the clearer it became that the person who had entered her home months earlier and orchestrated the events of that night was someone patient, deliberate, and frighteningly close. And while the search for answers continued, one thought haunted everyone involved. The woman who had vanished after calling 911 may have been more aware of her danger than anyone realized, and her disappearance was only the latest chapter in a story that had begun long before that cold October night. The quiet house, the hidden photos, the untraceable calls, they were all part of a larger, more sinister picture. Laura Bennett's life had been invaded in ways no one had imagined, and her disappearance was just the tip of the iceberg. Understanding the secrets behind the silence became the central challenge of the investigation, and every day that passed without answers only deepened the mystery of the woman who had disappeared after calling 911. The weeks following the discovery of the hidden photographs and Laura Bennett's mysterious phone calls were filled with dead ends, but the investigation refused to stall. Detectives knew that if Laura was still alive, every hour mattered, and if she was gone, there might still be evidence that could reveal the identity of the person who had orchestrated her disappearance. The case had grown beyond a simple missing person investigation. It was now a psychological puzzle, a web of subtle manipulations and invisible threats that had gone unnoticed for months, maybe even years. It was during one of these endless nights of reviewing evidence that the detectives noticed something they had overlooked before. They had been playing back Laura's 911 call repeatedly, analyzing every sound, every whisper, every pause. At first, the tapping noise in the background had seemed insignificant, almost like a nervous habit. But when a forensic audio expert slowed the recording down and isolated the frequencies, a new detail emerged. Beneath Laura's trembling whisper, beneath the faint rhythmic tapping, there was another sound, another voice. It was soft, low, and calm, almost a murmur, so quiet that it had been drowned out by Laura's fear in the original playback. The experts amplified the voice carefully, and it became unmistakable. A man was speaking. Not yelling, not threatening, not demanding. He was instructing. His voice was precise, deliberate, almost soothing in tone. He was telling Laura what to say, how to respond, even how to whisper. It was a chilling revelation. Laura had not been hiding from an unknown intruder alone in her closet. She had been coerced into calling 911, a witness forced to provide a lifeline she couldn't fully control. The implications sent a shiver through the investigation team. Whoever had entered her life had been patient, calculating, and intimate enough with her to force compliance without leaving a trace of violence. The discovery raised countless questions. How had this man managed to gain access to her home? How long had he been there, watching, planning, and manipulating? What had he wanted to achieve by forcing her to make the call? And most importantly, where was Laura now? The detectives felt that the voice they had isolated might hold the key to answering all of these questions, but tracing it would be nearly impossible. There were no recordings of previous interactions, no known voice samples, no identity to match it against. The man had been methodical in erasing any trail, just as he had been when he infiltrated her life in the first place. With renewed determination, the investigation shifted focus. Detectives began to reconstruct Laura's movements in the weeks before her disappearance. They reviewed surveillance footage from nearby stores, gas stations, and traffic cameras. Most of it was unremarkable. Laura walking to her car, entering stores, quietly interacting with cashiers. But a few frames stood out. On a foggy morning several weeks prior, a dark-colored sedan had been parked at a distance near her street. The license plate was unreadable, the driver obscured by the windshield glare, but the positioning of the car suggested someone was watching. This reinforced the idea that Laura's disappearance had been orchestrated long in advance. Police also began to dig into Laura's personal life in ways they had not before. They contacted her friends and colleagues to piece together her behavior leading up to the night she vanished. Almost all of them described subtle changes. She had grown distant, more secretive, and more cautious. She had begun avoiding social engagements, stopped communicating with friends as frequently, and seemed to be constantly looking over her shoulder. In retrospect, these behaviors were not random. They were symptoms of a person under surveillance, a person who had sensed danger but had been unable to confront it directly. Then came an unexpected breakthrough. The department received a new 911 call that chilled the investigators to the bone. The call had been traced to a gas station over 100 miles away, but the voice on the line sounded familiar. It was a woman, quiet, hesitant, almost whispering, but the way she spoke, the breathing patterns, the pacing of her words, matched Laura's call perfectly. Police quickly dispatched officers to the location, hoping that she had somehow survived and sought help. But when they arrived, the woman was gone. Security footage from the gas station captured a figure in a hooded jacket using the payphone. Her face was never visible, but the way she moved was uncanny. A limp, a slight unevenness in her gait. Detectives recognized the limp immediately. Laura had injured her ankle years before and had always walked with a subtle unevenness when tired or under stress. The woman in the footage walked the same way, and the investigators knew instinctively that it could only be her. Laura was alive, or at least, it appeared to be her. But where had she been? Who had allowed her to appear at that phone? And why had she left without speaking to the officers waiting to help her? This new lead deepened the mystery rather than solving it. Forensic audio experts examined the original 911 call again, now with heightened attention to detail. They found faint background noises that had previously gone unnoticed, soft breathing that did not belong to Laura, the subtle shuffle of feet, and another faint sound that could only be described as whispered instructions. The intruder's calm voice was directing her in real time, guiding her through the situation. It became terrifyingly clear that this was no random criminal. This was someone patient, careful, and intimately familiar with Laura's routines, someone who had likely been in her life for a long time. As detectives analyzed this new information, they began looking for patterns in Laura's past. They reviewed her email and messaging history, her phone records, and even her credit card transactions. They discovered that she had been receiving messages from an untraceable number for months, often late at night. Each message was brief, sometimes cryptic, sometimes simple instructions. They could not determine whether these messages were threats, manipulation, or communication from someone claiming to help her. Whoever had sent them was careful, leaving nothing that could identify them. Meanwhile, the hidden photographs remained a chilling testament to the intruder's meticulousness. Each image was carefully framed, capturing Laura's home life without detection. The timestamps confirmed that this person had been inside her house repeatedly over weeks or months, quietly observing, perhaps even anticipating the night of her disappearance. The realization that Laura had been living under such surveillance for so long left detectives considering the psychological impact on her. She had not only been terrified, she had been isolated, controlled, and manipulated by someone whose presence she might never have fully realized. Then came another breakthrough. Almost by accident. A digital forensics team discovered a minor anomaly in one of the files from the hidden photo folder. It was a metadata trace indicating that a file had been copied or moved on the same night as her disappearance. The timestamp coincided with the 911 call. Although it did not reveal the intruder's identity, it suggested that they had actively manipulated the evidence around Laura, further confirming the theory that her disappearance had been planned and executed with precision. As the investigation intensified, police began to consider the possibility that Laura had been coerced into creating her own alibi. The 911 call, initially perceived as a desperate plea for help, could have been part of the intruder's plan to manipulate the situation. By forcing her to call, the intruder created a public record, a witness account, and a distraction, all while maintaining complete control. It was a sophisticated and disturbing tactic, showing a level of psychological manipulation that few crimes exhibit. The detectives' theories began to converge. Laura's life had been infiltrated, her routines monitored, and her movements tracked for months. The intruder was methodical, precise, and patient, with knowledge of her home and habits that could only come from proximity or trust. The 911 call had been coerced. The photographs were evidence of surveillance, not random intrusion. The late-night messages and untraceable calls suggested ongoing communication, perhaps coercion, and the recent sighting at the gas station hinted that Laura might still be alive, though under the control of the same person who had orchestrated the original disappearance. The investigation team also began to explore potential motives. Why would someone do this to Laura? Stalking was an obvious explanation, but the level of planning and patience suggested something more sinister. Some detectives hypothesized that this could be someone from her past, someone with personal knowledge of her habits, someone who wanted power and control. Others considered financial or professional motives, though nothing concrete emerged. The mystery deepened as investigators realized that they were not just looking for a suspect, they were trying to understand a mind capable of years of hidden surveillance, manipulation, and coercion. In the weeks that followed, the detectives' obsession with the case only grew. They spent long nights reviewing every detail, looking for patterns, trying to anticipate the intruder's next move. Every new discovery, no matter how small, was a piece of a larger, terrifying puzzle. The photographs, the 911 call, the hidden messages, the late-night calls, all pointed to one conclusion. Laura Bennett's disappearance was not random, not impulsive, and not caused by an unknown stranger. It was the culmination of a meticulously planned and executed invasion of her life, a psychological operation designed to isolate, control, and disappear her. Even the public became aware of the disturbing complexity of the case. News outlets played the 911 call repeatedly, analyzing the whisper, the faint tapping, and the intruder's voice. Journalists speculated about motives and possible suspects, while online forums debated every detail of the photographs and phone records. The case became a cautionary tale, a story about how someone could invade a private life without leaving a trace, and how fear could be used as a weapon. Despite all the new information, the most important question remained unanswered. Where was Laura Bennett? Was she alive, hidden, and monitored by the same person who had coerced her into the 911 call? Or had she been moved far away, rendered invisible by a perpetrator who had anticipated every police tactic? The answer remained elusive, and every clue raised new questions. Detectives came to understand that solving the case required more than just following evidence. It required understanding the psychology of both victim and perpetrator. Laura had been forced into a terrifying scenario, coerced into documenting her own danger through photographs and calls, and manipulated into actions she could not fully control. The intruder had been patient, cunning, and deeply knowledgeable about her life, using fear and control as weapons. The investigation was no longer just about finding Laura. It was about unraveling a carefully constructed web of influence, surveillance, and psychological manipulation. As the weeks stretched into months, investigators held onto the faint hope that Laura was still alive. Every analysis of the 911 call, every review of the photographs, every trace of hidden communication became a potential lifeline. The case was no longer just a story of a missing woman. It had become a study in control, obsession, and the terrifying power of someone who could operate unseen, manipulating a life from the shadows. The disappearance of Laura Bennett had changed the town forever. Neighbors were more cautious, families locked doors, and the sense of safety that had once defined the quiet suburban street was gone. But for the detectives, the disappearance was more than a community tragedy. It was a complex mystery demanding answers, a puzzle filled with subtle clues and chilling signs of someone's careful, deliberate presence. The investigation would continue, and the detectives knew that any breakthrough could come at any moment. A hidden detail in a photograph, a new message, or even another forced call could provide the key. But the complexity of the case meant that answers would not come easily, and the shadow of the person who had taken Laura remained as threatening and unseen as ever. In the end, the story of Laura Bennett was no longer just about a missing woman. It was about understanding the mind capable of orchestrating a disappearance so precise that even the most meticulous investigators were left grasping at shadows, desperate to find the woman who had vanished after calling 911. The months following the mysterious 911 call and the discovery of hidden photographs became a blur of investigation, dead ends, and unanswered questions. The town that had once been quiet and familiar grew uneasy. Neighbors whispered about the strange disappearance of Laura Bennett, the woman who had vanished without a trace after calling for help in the dead of night. Media outlets from across the country picked up the story, sharing the chilling audio of her whispering voice and speculating about what could have happened. Despite all the attention and resources devoted to the case, Laura's whereabouts remained unknown, and the detectives assigned to the investigation began to feel the weight of a puzzle that refused to be solved. It was during one late evening, more than a year after her disappearance, that a breakthrough arrived in a way no one expected. A plain manila envelope appeared at the local police station with no return address. Inside was a flash drive. The envelope contained no letter, no message, only the drive. Curiosity and caution filled the room as detectives plugged it into a secure computer. On the drive was a single video file. The file had no metadata indicating when it had been created, and the footage was unmarked by any identifying information. When the video played, everyone in the room felt an immediate chill. The camera showed a dark room, barely illuminated by a single lamp in the corner. Shadows danced across the walls, and the air in the video seemed heavy, almost suffocating. Sitting on a chair in the center of the frame was a woman. Her face was partially hidden by a hood, but her voice was unmistakable when she spoke. It was Laura Bennett. Laura's words were calm but deliberate. She explained, as clearly as she could without revealing too much, that she was alive. Her appearance was thin and weary, her hair longer and unkempt, but her eyes held the same sharp intelligence that had always characterized her. She revealed that the man who had orchestrated her disappearance was someone she trusted, someone who had been a part of her life for years. She didn't name him, but the implication was horrifying. The threat had been close, hidden in plain sight. In the video, Laura described the methodical way she had been monitored. She explained that the hidden photographs were taken without her knowledge, and that the late-night phone calls had been part of the intruder's manipulation. Every detail of her life had been observed, catalogued, and used against her. The 911 call, she revealed, had not been a simple cry for help. It had been coerced. The man had instructed her on exactly what to say, forcing her to create a record that would mislead authorities while he maintained control. She went on to describe the psychological toll of the experience. Months of being watched, manipulated, and isolated had left her exhausted, fearful, and deeply cautious. Laura admitted that she had tried to communicate through subtle signals, hoping that someone would hear her cries for help hidden within ordinary actions. The placement of her phone, the timing of her messages, and even the faint tapping noises captured on the 911 call. It was a delicate and dangerous form of communication, but she had hoped that law enforcement would notice and understand. Then came the warning. Laura's tone shifted, and her voice became firmer, more urgent. "Listen closely," she said. "The truth is always there. You just have to know how to hear it. Don't assume what you see is everything. Don't assume what you hear is what it means. There are layers, and someone who knows you well can manipulate every layer. Watch for patterns, not isolated events. That is how you will find me." Her words left the detective shaken. This was not just a message from a survivor. It was a challenge, a puzzle meant to guide them closer to the truth without revealing the intruder's identity. The video ended abruptly. The screen went black, and there was no indication of where Laura had gone or who had sent the drive. But despite the lack of clear answers, the investigators felt a renewed sense of purpose. They now knew, without a doubt, that Laura was alive at the time the video was recorded, and that she was aware of the surveillance and manipulation she had endured. Her intelligence and resourcefulness were evident, and it became clear that she had been actively trying to communicate through any means possible. Detectives began to examine the evidence in a new light. The flash drive, the hidden photographs, and the untraceable phone calls all became part of a larger pattern, a system of control and communication devised by the intruder. Every detail that had once seemed random or unimportant was now potentially a clue, a signal, or breadcrumb left behind by Laura or the person holding her. Investigators reviewed every piece of evidence with renewed scrutiny, looking for patterns that had previously gone unnoticed. One significant discovery emerged from analyzing the flash drive itself. While the video file had no clear metadata, the file system and storage structure suggested that it had been carefully organized to avoid detection. The fact that someone had gone to such lengths to send it to the police indicated that Laura, or someone assisting her, was still in control, even if only partially. This reinforced the theory that she had been deliberately attempting to communicate clues without putting herself at additional risk. The detectives also revisited the audio from the original 911 call, this time with the insights gained from the video. They listened closely to the faint tapping and the whispered instructions of the intruder. Each sound, each hesitation, each rhythm could be part of a code, a signal meant to convey more than what was immediately apparent. Experts in behavioral analysis suggested that Laura had been forced to perform actions that were part of a larger message, one that required interpretation beyond the obvious. Every pause, every sound, every word was potentially significant. Public interest in the case surged again after news of the video leaked to the press. People speculated about who Laura's captor could be, debating theories about stalkers, acquaintances, or someone with professional skills in surveillance and manipulation. Forums and social media exploded with discussion, dissecting every detail of the 911 call, the photographs, and the video message. While some theories were far-fetched, the widespread attention increased pressure on law enforcement to solve the case and protect Laura if she was still in danger. Despite this renewed scrutiny, detectives faced the challenge of uncertainty. The intruder was meticulous, careful, and possibly aware that law enforcement was analyzing each detail. It became clear that moving too quickly or revealing too much publicly could put Laura at risk. Every action needed to be measured, every decision calculated. The investigation had shifted from a simple search to a high-stakes psychological battle between detectives trying to decipher the clues and an unknown person skilled in manipulation and control. Investigators also began to consider the possibility that Laura had been relocated far from the area she once called home. The precise control of her life, the careful instructions, and the inability to locate her physically suggested that the intruder might have moved her to a location where she could be monitored without detection. This theory introduced new challenges. Tracking her would require sophisticated methods, and every digital trace, every interaction, had to be analyzed for potential leads. As the investigation continued, detectives explored potential suspects, focusing on people who had been close to Laura over the years. Friends, colleagues, and acquaintances were scrutinized for behavioral patterns, access to her home, and any signs of obsession or manipulation. Investigators also considered the possibility that the captor had a professional background, someone capable of surveillance, evasion, and psychological control. Each theory was pursued carefully, though no definitive evidence had yet emerged. The psychological impact of the case on law enforcement and the community was profound. Detectives spent long hours reviewing evidence, analyzing behavior, and attempting to interpret Laura's hidden messages. They struggled with the knowledge that she had been alive, aware, and trying to communicate while possibly being held under constant surveillance. The complexity of the case demanded not only investigative skill but also patience, intuition, and creativity. Amid the investigation, the detectives realized that Laura's situation highlighted a broader truth about control, fear, and communication. Her life had been infiltrated in ways that were invisible to the outside world, demonstrating how someone could manipulate another person without leaving obvious evidence. The subtlety of her captor's methods made it difficult to act, but the clues left behind, her 911 call, the photographs, the hidden messages, and the video, offered hope. If investigators could decode the patterns, they might finally uncover her location and identity of her captor. In the months following the arrival of the flash drive, the case became a symbol of determination and resilience. Laura Bennett's intelligence and foresight, her ability to leave messages despite the constraints imposed on her, became the focal point of the investigation. Detectives worked tirelessly to understand the complex web of surveillance and manipulation that had governed her life, believing that her careful planning, subtle signals, and unwavering presence could ultimately lead them to her. Even without immediate resolution, the case inspired a new approach to missing person investigations. Law enforcement began incorporating lessons from Laura's disappearance into training programs, emphasizing the importance of analyzing subtle clues, patterns of behavior, and hidden communication. They recognized that traditional methods might not be enough when a person skilled in manipulation and control was involved. The case demonstrated that survival sometimes depended on intelligence, patience, and the ability to communicate in ways that might be overlooked by the untrained eye. Months turned into years, but Laura Bennett's story refused to fade. The woman who had disappeared after calling 911 became a symbol of resilience and mystery, her voice echoing through the recordings, photographs, and hidden messages she had left behind. Her warnings in the video, about listening carefully, understanding patterns, and recognizing manipulation, remained as chilling as they were insightful. Even in her absence, she had managed to guide law enforcement, challenge their assumptions, and leave a trail of breadcrumbs designed to reveal the truth when the time was right. The case, though unresolved, left an indelible mark on everyone involved. Detectives, journalists, and the community were reminded of the fragility of safety, the subtlety of control, and the resilience of a person who refused to be silenced. Laura Bennett had vanished physically, but her presence remained, through her whispers, her signals, and her courage. In the end, the woman who disappeared after calling 911 became more than a missing person. She became a lesson in vigilance, communication, and the strength of the human spirit in the face of manipulation and fear. Her disappearance was a mystery, her fate uncertain, but her voice, her warnings, and her intelligence continued to guide those searching for her. Every clue, every hidden signal, became part of a larger story, a story of survival, ingenuity, and the unyielding determination of a woman who refused to be forgotten. Laura Bennett's story remains unfinished. The answers may yet be found, but her message is clear. Even in the darkest circumstances, subtlety and intelligence can create hope. And even when someone disappears, they can still leave behind a voice that demands to be heard. Her disappearance is not just a case to be solved. It is a reminder that courage and foresight can persist, even when the world seems silent and the danger invisible.